Helen Grant stood in the observation deck of Concordia Station and watched the stars beyond the viewport. She had been here for 15 years, leading humanity's diplomatic mission to join the Galactic Council. 15 years of meetings, negotiations, and endless waiting. Behind her stood Commander Jake Morrison, his military uniform pressed and clean, and Dr. Lisa Chen, who had spent a decade studying alien cultures in hopes of bridging the gap between humanity and the galaxy. The council chamber was massive, built to accommodate hundreds of different species. The Vextar were crystalline beings that shimmered with inner light. The Krell had 6 arms each, and exoskeletons that clicked when they moved. The Luminari were pure energy, floating in containment fields that glowed soft blue. These 3 species had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and they had kept humanity waiting at the door, like unwanted guests. Helen had presented Earth's case more times than she could count. She had shown them human art, science, and philosophy. She had explained how humanity had unified after centuries of conflict. She had promised that humans would follow galactic law and contribute to the greater community. Every time, the Council found new reasons to delay, new requirements to meet, new hoops to jump through. Today was different. Today, the Council had finally reached their decision. Velthos, the Vextar speaker, floated at the center of the chamber. His crystalline body pulsed with colors that the translation device rendered as words. The message was clear and brutal. Humanity would never be granted Council membership. The reasons were many, but they all pointed to the same conclusion. Humans were too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted among civilized species. But the Council didn't stop there. Velthos continued speaking, and with each translated word, Helen felt her jaw tighten. Earth must surrender all military vessels. Earth must accept permanent monitoring by Council peacekeepers. Earth must remain confined to their home solar system, forbidden from expanding further into the galaxy. Humanity had 72 hours to comply. Jake's hand moved to his sidearm, then stopped. Lisa's face had gone pale. Around the chamber, delegates from other species watched with expressions ranging from pity to satisfaction. Some had warned Helen this was coming. Others had clearly been waiting for this moment. Helen stood and walked to the speaker's platform. Her voice was steady when she addressed the Council. She thanked them for their time and consideration. She asked if there was any path forward, any way humanity could prove themselves worthy. Velthos's response was final. The decision was made. Humanity would comply or face consequences. The delegates returned to their quarters in silence. Jake immediately began encrypting messages to Earth. Lisa sat at her desk and stared at nothing. Helen opened her datapad and began to write. The words came easily because she had been preparing for this moment for years, ever since her intelligence contacts had warned her the Council would never say yes. She drafted humanity's formal response. 2 words. We decline. The message went out on all channels. Within hours, every human colony, station, and settlement had received it. The reaction was immediate. Some celebrated. Some panicked. Most simply waited to see what would happen next. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. They had never been refused before. Lesser species always bent when pressure was applied. Velthos demanded immediate military action. The Krell war leader, Thuanket, assured the Council that enforcement would be swift. 300 ships would be dispatched to Proxima Station, humanity's furthest outpost, a demonstration of power. After that, Earth would surrender. What the Council didn't know was that humanity had been building something in secret. Far beyond Neptune's orbit, hidden in the dark spaces between planets, massive shipyards had been under construction for a decade. Every strange material request, every unexplained energy signature, every missing cargo ship had been part of the plan. Earth's government had known this day would come. They had prepared. Admiral Kyle Bennett received the encrypted orders at Facility 7. The message was simple. Operation Wildfire was now active. The fleet was to make ready for deployment. He walked through the construction bays and marveled at what humanity had built in silence. Hundreds of warships, each one incorporating stolen technology, reverse-engineered weapons, and human innovation. The galaxy thought humans were primitive. They were about to learn otherwise. Captain Nina Reeves stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched her crew run final checks. The ship was massive, twice the size of standard Council cruisers, bristling with weapons that no alien had ever seen. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Sam Hughes, reported all systems green. Her operations officer, Commander Beth Warren, confirmed the fleet was ready to move on her command. Back on Earth, President Alan Cooper addressed the United Earth Assembly. The chamber was filled with representatives from every nation, every colony, every human settlement in known space. He spoke plainly about the choice before them. They could submit and live as prisoners in their own solar system. They could fight and risk everything. Or, they could do what humans had always done when faced with impossible odds. They could stand up and prove everyone wrong. The vote was called. Every hand rose in agreement. Humanity would not bow. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would chart its own course among the stars, whatever the cost. Across human space, the preparations began in earnest. Mining colonies activated hidden defense platforms. Civilian transports began evacuating non-essential personnel from border worlds. Military reserves were called up. Shipyards went to full production. Every human who could hold a weapon, pilot a ship, or operate a system volunteered. The Galactic Council watched these preparations with amusement. They had seen this before. Young species always postured before accepting reality. Tuanket assembled his enforcement fleet with casual efficiency. 300 ships, crewed by veterans who had pacified 17 different species. This would be no different. Helen Grant sent one final message to Velthos. She asked him to reconsider. She warned him that humanity would defend itself. She offered one last chance for peace. The Vextar speaker's response was dismissive. Humanity had 3 days. After that, the galaxy would see what happened to those who defied the Council. Jake Morrison sealed the last of the classified documents and prepared to evacuate Concordia Station. Lisa Chen took one final look at her research, all the work she had done to understand alien cultures, and realized none of it mattered now. The time for diplomacy had passed. Helen stood in the observation deck one last time and watched the Council ships gathering in the distance. They looked so confident, so certain of their superiority. She thought about all the years she had spent trying to earn their respect through patience and perseverance. That approach had failed. Now, humanity would earn respect the old-fashioned way. She activated her communicator and spoke directly to Admiral Bennett. The words were simple, but carried the weight of humanity's future. The fleet was authorized to engage. Rules of engagement were lifted. Every captain had discretion to act as they saw fit. This was total war. The galaxy had made its choice. Now, humanity would make theirs. The shipyards beyond Neptune had been humanity's best-kept secret for 10 years. Admiral Kyle Bennett walked through the command center of Facility 7 and felt pride surge through him. The place was enormous, spanning hundreds of kilometers, hidden among the ice and rock where no Council scout had ever bothered to look. Why would they? Humanity was primitive, barely worth watching, or so they thought. The main viewing screen showed the fleet assembling. 400 capital ships, each one a masterpiece of human engineering. 800 cruisers, built for speed and firepower. Thousands of fighters and support vessels. This was the culmination of every resource humanity could spare, every brilliant mind they could recruit, every sacrifice made in silence. Captain Nina Reeves reviewed the tactical data on the USS Defiance. Her ship was the pride of the fleet, a dreadnought that incorporated technology from a dozen different sources. The hull was reinforced with materials reverse-engineered from a crashed Krell transport. The shields used luminary energy distribution patterns. The weapons were pure human innovation, designed to kill efficiently and without mercy. Her crew had trained for this moment for 5 years. Lieutenant Sam Hughes knew every fighter maneuver ever recorded. Commander Beth Warren could hack Council communications in her sleep. Chief Engineer Paul Grant, no relation to the ambassador, had memorized every system on the ship. They were ready. The order came through encrypted channels. Operation Wildfire was active. The fleet would deploy in phases, spreading across human space to protect the colonies and prepare for the inevitable Council response. The Defiance would lead Battle Group Alpha, 40 ships assigned to the Proxima sector. That was where the Council would strike first. That was where humanity would make its stand. On Earth, President Alan Cooper met with his cabinet in the Situation Room deep beneath Geneva. The screens showed updates from across human space, colonies reporting ready status, defense platforms coming online, civilian evacuations proceeding on schedule. Everything was moving according to plan, but the cost was already mounting. The economy was shifting to full war production. Families were being separated. Lives were being uprooted. Defense Secretary Karen Mills raised the question everyone was thinking. Could they actually win this? The numbers were brutal. The Council had thousands of ships, millions of trained soldiers, resources from 100 worlds. Humanity had built an impressive fleet in secret. But on paper, they were still vastly outnumbered. Cooper's response was simple. Winning wasn't about numbers, it was about will. The Council had grown soft over millennia of easy dominance. They expected compliance because they had always received it. Humanity had something they lacked. Humanity was fighting for survival, for freedom, for the right to exist on their own terms. That kind of desperation made for dangerous enemies. The President addressed the people of Earth that evening. The speech was broadcast to every device, every screen, every communication system in human space. He spoke plainly about what was coming: war with the Galactic Council, hardship and sacrifice, losses that would hurt for generations, but also hope. Hope that their children would live free. Hope that humanity would stand among the stars as equals, not subjects. The response was overwhelming. Recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers. Factories retooled for military production. Scientists shared research freely. The entire species came together with a unity that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Fear had a way of clarifying priorities. At Proxima Station, Commander Dan Price watched the Council fleet approach on long-range sensors. 300 ships, moving in perfect formation, confident and unhurried. They had sent a message demanding surrender. Price had responded with silence. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them come close enough to see what humanity had prepared. The station itself was armed, but that wasn't the real defense. Hidden among the asteroids surrounding Proxima were weapons platforms, mines, and automated defense systems. The entire sector was a trap, and the Council was walking right into it. Price's second officer, Lieutenant Greg Stone, reported the Council fleet entering weapons range. The Krell commander Thun Ket was broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding immediate surrender and threatening orbital bombardment if Proxima didn't comply. His tone was bored. Like this was routine. Price activated the response channel. His message was brief. You wanted to see what humanity is capable of. Now, you'll learn. Then he gave the order his crew had been waiting for. Fire everything. The asteroid field exploded into action. Hidden railguns fired projectiles at a fraction of light speed. Plasma cannons, reverse-engineered from captured luminary weapons, carved through the darkness. Missiles with quantum warheads created tears in space-time itself. The Council formation, packed tight and moving slow, was hit from every angle. Thun Ket's flagship staggered under the assault. His shields held, but dozens of his escort ships weren't so fortunate. They broke apart, atmosphere venting, debris spreading in all directions. The Krell commander screamed orders, trying to restore formation, trying to locate the attackers, That was when Battle Group Alpha dropped out of faster-than-light travel. 40 human warships appeared at the edge of the system and accelerated toward the confused Council fleet. The USS Defiance led the charge, its main cannon charging with energy that made the surrounding space distort. Nina Reeves gave the order, and the Dreadnought's primary weapon fired. The beam of concentrated energy punched through 3 Council cruisers in a single shot, the excess power dissipating in a spectacular explosion. Her tactical officer launched fighters, and Sam Hughes led his squadron into the chaos with precision that came from endless simulation training. The Council forces tried to adapt, but human tactics were unlike anything they had encountered. Humanity didn't fight with honor. They fought with ambush and deception. They targeted the weakest ships first, breaking formation and creating panic. They used overwhelming firepower, concentrated on single targets, rather than spreading fire across multiple enemies. They accepted casualties as the price of victory, rather than retreating to preserve forces. Commander Beth Warren hacked into the Council communication network and fed false orders. Enemy ships turned on each other in confusion. Thunkit tried to regain control, but the humans jammed his signals and isolated his command ship. The battle that the Krell expected to last hours was decided in 17 minutes. The Council fleet broke. Those ships that could still move jumped to faster than light speed and fled. Thunket's flagship escaped, barely, its hull scarred and systems failing. The proud Krell commander sent a priority message back to the Council. These humans fight unlike any species we've encountered. They fight to win, at any cost. Dan Price surveyed the aftermath from Proxima Station. Human losses had been light. 3 platforms destroyed. 2 fighters lost. The Council had lost over 100 ships. The strategic implications were enormous. Humanity had just proven they could fight and win against overwhelming numbers. Nina Reeves gathered her officers for debriefing. The battle had revealed weaknesses in their tactics. Systems that needed refinement. Improvements that could be made. But overall, the result was clear. Human technology worked. Human training paid off. Human determination made the difference. News of the victory spread across human space within hours. Celebrations erupted on Earth and the colonies. But Admiral Bennett and President Cooper knew this was just the beginning. The Council would not accept this defeat. They would return with greater numbers and renewed fury. Humanity had won the first battle. The real war was just starting. Kyle Bennett issued new orders to the fleet. Spread out and fortify defensive positions. Prepare for retaliation. Run continuous combat drills. This victory had bought time, but time was all it had bought. The galaxy was watching now. Some species watched with hope, wondering if the Council could finally be challenged. Others watched with fear, worried about what humanity's rise would mean. And the Council watched with rage. The Galactic Council chamber erupted in chaos. Velthos, the Vextar speaker, pulsed with colors that the translation system struggled to interpret. Rage, humiliation, and disbelief mixed together. The Krell representative demanded immediate military escalation. The Luminari argued for caution, but were shouted down by species that saw humanity's victory as an existential threat to the established order. Warmaster Thunkit appeared via hologram, his exoskeleton cracked and damaged from the battle at Proxima. His report was clinical, but damning. Human weapons were more advanced than intelligence had suggested. Human tactics were ruthless and effective. Human willingness to accept casualties made them unpredictable and dangerous. The Council had underestimated them catastrophically. Velthos declared humanity a rogue species and authorized total war. The largest armada in galactic history would be assembled. Over 2,000 warships from a dozen member species. This would not be a peacekeeping operation or an enforcement action. This would be extermination. Humanity would be crushed so completely that no other species would ever dare challenge Council authority again. The call went out across the galaxy. Every member species was required to contribute ships and crews. Some responded enthusiastically, eager to prove their loyalty or genuinely fearful of human expansion. Others complied reluctantly, bound by treaties and agreements they couldn't break. A few smaller species sent the minimum required and quietly hoped humanity would survive. Admiral Kyle Bennett received intelligence about the Council build-up within days. His network of informants and monitoring stations tracked every ship movement, every communication, every supply convoy. The numbers were staggering. 2,000 capital ships, 5,000 support vessels, enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds, all of it heading toward human space. He activated Operation Wildfire Phase 2. Every human warship across the colonies received recall orders. The fleet that had been dispersed and hidden would now converge. Battle Group Alpha under Nina Reeves would hold the line at Proxima. Battle Groups Beta through Delta would form a defensive sphere around Earth. The remaining forces would assemble at the Meridian Expanse, a strategic crossroads between Council and human territory. That was where the decisive battle would be fought. Captain Nina Reeves pushed the USS Defiance and her crew to their limits. After Proxima, her ship had become famous. Other captains looked to her for leadership. Crews wanted to serve under her command, but fame didn't change the mathematics of warfare. They were still outnumbered. They would still face enemies with centuries more combat experience. Victory was possible, but far from guaranteed. She gathered her officers for a frank discussion. Lieutenant Sam Hughes admitted he was scared but ready. Commander Beth Warren confessed she had nightmares about failing her crew. Chief Engineer Paul Grant said the ship could take more punishment than any enemy expected, but not infinite punishment. Nina told them the truth. Some of them would die. Maybe all of them would die. But they would die fighting for something worth fighting for. On Earth, the mood was tense. President Alan Cooper imposed martial law in some regions to prevent panic. Defense Secretary Karen Mills coordinated the evacuation of children and elderly from vulnerable colonies. The military draft was expanded to include anyone physically capable of service. The entire economy shifted to total war production. Factories ran 24 hours a day. Rationing was implemented. Luxury became a memory. But morale remained surprisingly high. Humanity had proven they could fight and win. The victory at Proxima had given people hope. Recruitment remained strong. Volunteers worked extra shifts without complaint. Scientists made breakthrough after breakthrough, refining weapons and defenses. The species that had been divided by nation, culture, and ideology for millennia now stood united against a common threat. Cooper addressed the assembly again, this time from the military command center. He spoke about sacrifice and duty. He reminded everyone why they were fighting. Not for conquest or glory, not for resources or territory. They fought for the simple right to exist as free people, to raise their children without council oversight, to explore the stars without permission from species that viewed them as inferiors. The fleet began assembling at Meridian Expanse 2 weeks before the Council Armada was expected to arrive. Kyle Bennett transferred his flag to the USS Resolution, a new dreadnought, even larger than the Defiance. He watched as ships from across human space converged on his position. 400 capital ships, 800 cruisers, thousands of fighters. It was an impressive force. It was also outnumbered 5-1. His tactical staff ran simulation after simulation. Every scenario ended the same way. Humanity lost. The casualties varied, the timeline changed, but the outcome was inevitable. Bennett rejected the simulations. Numbers didn't account for human ingenuity. Predictions couldn't measure desperation. He ordered his staff to stop running scenarios and start planning how to make the impossible possible. The Council Armada arrived at Meridian Expanse exactly on schedule. 2,000 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They spread across the system like a plague, blocking every escape route. The commander was a Vextar admiral named Kethzar, chosen specifically because he had never lost a battle. His reputation was built on overwhelming force and ruthless efficiency. Kethzar broadcast a message to the human fleet. Surrender now and Earth would be spared. Continue fighting, and every human world would be reduced to ash. He gave them 1 hour to decide. The message was meant to demoralize, to make humans realize the futility of resistance. Kyle Bennett's response was to charge weapons and advance his fleet into optimal firing range. The hour passed in silence. When it ended, both sides opened fire simultaneously. The largest battle in recorded history had begun. Space became a nightmare of energy beams, explosions, and debris. Human ships focused fire on individual targets, overwhelming shields, and destroying enemies before moving to the next. Council forces spread their attacks, trying to disable rather than destroy. That tactical difference mattered. For every human ship lost, 3 Council vessels became wreckage. Nina Reeves led Battle Group Alpha in a desperate flanking maneuver. The Defiance took hits that would have destroyed lesser ships, but kept fighting. Sam Hughes and his fighter squadron carved through enemy formations. Beth Warren coordinated electronic warfare across the fleet, jamming Council communications and creating chaos in their tactical networks. But the numbers told a brutal story. Human losses mounted. Good ships with good crews were torn apart. Entire battle groups went silent. Kyle Bennett watched from the Resolution as the casualty reports came in. They were losing. Slowly. Expensively for the Council. But losing, nonetheless. The battle raged for 3 days without pause. Crews fought until exhaustion forced them to take stimulants. Ships continued firing with failing systems. Wounded stayed at their posts. The human fleet refused to break, refused to retreat, refused to accept defeat. On the 4th day, Nina Reeves made a decision that would become legendary. The USS Defiance was badly damaged, surrounded by Council ships, shields failing. She could retreat and save her ship and crew, or she could do something else. She ordered all non-essential personnel to evacuate to nearby vessels. She plotted a course directly at the Council flagship, where Kethzar commanded his forces. Her remaining crew understood immediately. Chief Engineer Paul Grant overloaded the reactor and armed every warhead on the ship. Beth Warren transmitted final tactical data to the fleet. Sam Hughes flew his damaged fighter alongside, refusing to abandon his captain. Nina aimed the Defiance at the heart of the enemy formation and pushed the engines to maximum. Kethzar saw her coming and ordered everything to fire at the approaching dreadnought. The Defiance shuddered under the assault, but kept moving. At the last possible moment, Nina activated the emergency teleport system. Her crew materialized on friendly ships just as the Defiance, packed with antimatter warheads and a critical reactor, collided with the Council flagship. The explosion lit up the entire system. The Council flagship and everything within 50,000 kilometers simply ceased to exist. The shockwave damaged hundreds of other ships. The Council formation, so perfect and disciplined, dissolved into chaos. Without Kethzar's leadership, without clear command structure, the Armada faltered. Kyle Bennett seized the moment and ordered a general assault. The human fleet, battered and bleeding, threw everything they had at the confused enemy. It was enough. The Council forces broke and fled, jumping to faster-than-light speed in disorder and panic. The Meridian expanse fell silent except for the hiss of venting atmosphere and the crackle of cooling wreckage. Humanity had won, but the cost was devastating. Half the fleet was destroyed or crippled. Tens of thousands dead. The survivors were exhausted, beyond measure. But they had won. News of the Council's defeat at Meridian Expanse spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had lived under Council rule for millennia watched in shock as the impossible became reality. The mighty Galactic Council, enforcer of order for 3,000 years, had been defeated by a species barely 2 centuries into space travel. The Vextar Council chambers became a place of accusations and recrimination. Velthos faced calls for his removal from dozens of species representatives. How had this happened? How had humanity, dismissed as primitive and backward, built a fleet capable of challenging the combined might of the galaxy. Someone must have helped them. Someone must have betrayed Council secrets. The investigations found nothing because there was nothing to find. Humanity had done it alone, through determination, sacrifice, and a willingness to spend every resource they had on survival. While Council species had grown comfortable and complacent, humans had worked in secret, building weapons in the darkness, training soldiers in hidden bases, preparing for the war they knew was inevitable. But the Council's shock was nothing compared to the reaction from smaller species. The Yith, a peaceful trading civilization that had been forced to accept Council economic controls, quietly celebrated in their home systems. The Draknor, warrior culture reduced to ceremonial guards after their defeat centuries ago, watched with grudging respect. The Solan, scientific minds restricted by Council technology regulations, began having unauthorized discussions about what humanity's victory might mean for the future. Admiral Kyle Bennett surveyed the wreckage at Meridian Expanse and felt the weight of every loss. Good people had died under his command. Ships that represented years of work and countless resources were now debris. Nina Reeves had survived her sacrifice, but hundreds of other captains hadn't been so fortunate. The victory was real, but the price made it feel hollow. He sent a message to President Cooper. The fleet needed time to regroup and repair. Losses had been 50% of capital ships and 40% of support vessels. Replacement crews were being trained, but green recruits weren't the same as veterans. New ships were under construction in the hidden yards, but production took time. The fleet that had just won the greatest victory in human history was in no condition to fight another major battle. Cooper received the news in the Geneva Command Center. Defense Secretary Karen Mills argued for pressing the advantage while the Council was off balance. Others counseled caution and consolidation. The President listened to all perspectives and made his decision. Humanity would shift to defensive posture and offer peace negotiations. Not from weakness, but from strength. They had proven their point. Now they needed to see if the galaxy had learned the lesson. Ambassador Helen Grant prepared to return to the Council chambers for the first time since humanity's rejection. The circumstances were very different now. She wasn't going as a supplicant begging for recognition. She was going as the representative of a power that had bloodied the Council's nose and proven it could do so again. The Council's invitation came with conditions. Helen could address the assembly, but humanity must agree to ceasefire during negotiations. No new ship construction. No expansion into disputed territories. No military movements that could be interpreted as aggressive. Helen accepted the conditions publicly, while privately instructing Admiral Bennett to ignore them. Humanity had learned not to trust Council promises. The journey to Council space took 2 weeks. Helen used the time to prepare her message. She consulted with linguists to ensure no phrase could be misinterpreted. She worked with military advisors to understand what leverage humanity actually had. She spoke with Cooper daily about the political situation back on Earth, where some factions wanted total war and others feared they had already pushed too far. Her ship, escorted by a full battle group, arrived at the Council's central station. Security was intense. Helen and her small diplomatic team were scanned, searched, and monitored constantly. The Council was taking no chances. The memory of human capabilities was fresh in everyone's mind. The Council chamber was packed. Every species wanted to witness this moment. Helen walked to the speaker's platform with Admiral Kyle Bennett at her side. The symbolism was deliberate. Diplomacy, backed by military power. Peace offered from a position of strength. Velthos opened the session with barely controlled anger. He accused humanity of warmongering, of attacking peaceful enforcement vessels, of refusing legitimate Council authority. His words were meant to paint humans as villains, as threats to galactic stability that needed to be contained or eliminated. Helen listened without interruption. When Velthos finished, she took the platform and spoke clearly. Her words were translated into 100 languages simultaneously. She acknowledged that humanity had fought the Council. She didn't apologize. She explained why. For 15 years, she had negotiated in good faith. For 15 years, the Council had strung humanity along with false promises. When the final rejection came, it included demands that would have made Earth a prison and humans subjects rather than citizens. She asked a simple question. What would any species in this chamber have done? Would the Vextar accept permanent quarantine? Would the Krell surrender their military? Would the Luminari submit to foreign oversight of their government? The answer was obvious. No species would accept such terms. Humanity had only done what any proud people would do. They had defended their freedom. The chamber erupted. Some species shouted agreement. Others demanded Helen be removed. The Krell representative actually pulled a weapon before security intervened. Velthos called for order, but the chaos continued. Helen waited for silence and then delivered the core of her message. Humanity sought peace, but would never again submit to arbitrary rule. They proposed a new arrangement, a true alliance of equals, where every species had a real voice, where decisions were made by consensus rather than dictation from ancient powers, where smaller species didn't live in fear of the Council's enforcement fleets. The proposal was radical. The current Council structure concentrated power in the hands of the 3 founding species. Lesser members had token representation, but no real authority. Helen was proposing to tear down millennia of tradition and replace it with something unprecedented. Velthos rejected the idea immediately. The current system worked. It had maintained peace for 3,000 years. Humanity's complaints were the result of their youth and inexperience. The Council would consider limited reforms, but the basic structure was not negotiable. Helen's response was delivered calmly, but everyone heard the steel beneath the words. The Council could reject the proposal. They could insist on maintaining their power, but they should understand the consequences. Humanity would continue to exist and grow stronger. Their shipyards were building the next generation of warships even now. Their technology was advancing rapidly. Their population was young and expanding. More importantly, other species were watching. If the Council crushed humanity through overwhelming force, what message did that send? That rebellion would be met with extermination? That the only choice was submission or death? How many species would look at human courage and wonder if they too could break free? The session ended without agreement. Helen and her delegation returned to their ship. The Council convened in closed session to debate. The divisions were deep. Some species wanted total war against humanity, regardless of cost. Others saw humanity's proposal as an opportunity to reform a system that had grown corrupt and self-serving. Still, others simply wanted the whole situation to disappear. While the Council argued, something unexpected began happening across the galaxy. Smaller species started reaching out to Earth directly, bypassing Council channels entirely. The Yith sent trade proposals. The Draknor requested military consultation. The Solon wanted to exchange scientific research. Each communication was a small act of defiance against Council authority. President Cooper faced a difficult choice. Accepting these overtures would antagonize the Council and potentially restart the war. Rejecting them would waste the opportunity humanity's victory had created. He consulted his advisors, his military leaders, and ultimately, his conscience. The decision was to accept all legitimate diplomatic contact while being careful not to create military alliances that could be seen as threatening. The Council watched this diplomatic maneuvering with growing alarm. Their monopoly on galactic politics was being challenged not just militarily, but politically. Species that had never dared question Council authority were now openly communicating with the humans. The old order was cracking. Velthos sent a private message to Helen. The Council would agree to preliminary discussions about reform, not acceptance of humanity's proposal, but willingness to talk. Willingness to talk. It was a tiny concession, barely movement at all. But it was movement nonetheless. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Council had blinked. Helen reported back to Cooper and Bennett. The war wasn't over. The council remained dangerous and hostile. But a door had opened. A possibility that hadn't existed before. The galaxy was changing whether the council wanted it to or not. Nina Reeves, promoted to admiral and given command of the rebuilt 7th Fleet, watched from her new flagship as human and alien vessels began cautious joint exercises with some of the smaller species. Trust was limited, but it was a beginning. The galaxy that had watched in terror as humanity rose to fight was now watching to see what humanity would build in victory. The negotiations dragged on for 6 months. Ambassador Helen Grant found herself in endless meetings with council representatives who seemed more interested in preserving their power than finding real solutions. Every proposal humanity made was met with counter-proposals designed to maintain the status quo. Every concession the council offered came with conditions that made it meaningless. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. While diplomats argued in ornate chambers, the reality on the ground was shifting. Human trade ships now traveled freely through sectors previously restricted. Small species that had been afraid to deal with humans openly now did so without fear of council retaliation. The enforcement fleets that once patrolled every border were spread thin, unable to be everywhere at once. Admiral Kyle Bennett used the diplomatic cover to rebuild humanity's military capabilities. New shipyards opened in systems throughout human space, no longer hidden but operating openly. Advanced weapons research continued at facilities that welcomed scientists from allied species. The fleet that had been cut in half at Meridian Expanse was now larger and more capable than before the war. President Alan Cooper walked a careful line between strength and restraint. He authorized defensive buildups, but forbade offensive operations. He welcomed diplomatic contact with any species but refused to create formal military alliances that might threaten the council. He understood that humanity needed time to consolidate gains, to grow stronger, to become established as a permanent power in the galaxy. The Galactic Council fractured under the pressure. The Vex-Tar, led by Velthos, insisted that humanity must be brought to heel or destroyed. The Krell, humiliated by their military defeats, demanded revenge. But the Luminari, always the most thoughtful of the founding species, began to question whether the old ways could continue. A Luminari elder named Sothral approached Helen privately during one negotiating session. He spoke carefully, aware that his words bordered on treason against the council he had served for centuries. He asked her a simple question. What did humanity truly want? Not the diplomatic position, not the negotiating stance, but the real goal. Helen answered honestly. Humanity wanted to be left alone to grow and develop without interference. They wanted the same rights and respect afforded to any other species. They wanted a galaxy where power came from merit and contribution, not from how long a species had held authority. They wanted their children to explore the stars as free people, not as subjects of a distant council that viewed them as inferiors. Sothral considered her words and asked another question. Would humanity accept a reformed council? One where all species had equal representation, where decisions required consensus rather than being imposed by the founding members, where military force was used only for genuine peacekeeping and not to enforce political control. Helen said humanity would consider such an arrangement, but trust would need to be earned. Too many promises had been broken. Too many peaceful overtures had been rejected. The council would need to prove through actions, not words, that they genuinely sought equality and cooperation. News of these private talks leaked within days. The reaction from conservative council members was explosive. Velthos called for Sothral's removal and punishment. Several species threatened to withdraw from the council entirely if reforms were implemented. The careful stability that had lasted millennia was collapsing. But other voices rose in support of change. The Yith officially proposed a new council charter based on equal representation. The Draknor demanded an end to restrictions on their military rebuilding. The Solon called for open sharing of technology and research. Dozens of smaller species added their support. The movement that humanity had started was becoming a revolution. Captain Nina Reeves, now Admiral Reeves, and commander of Earth's Home Defense Fleet, watched the political maneuvering from her flagship. Her orders were clear. Protect human space. Respond to any threats with overwhelming force. But avoid starting conflicts that could derail the diplomatic progress. It was a difficult balance, especially when Council hardliners continued to probe human defenses, looking for weakness. One such incident nearly reignited the war. A Krell battle group entered human territory without permission, claiming navigational errors. Nina scrambled her fleet and moved to intercept. The two forces faced each other across space, weapons charged, waiting for someone to make a mistake. For 12 hours, the standoff continued. Nina opened a direct channel to the Krell commander. She spoke calmly and professionally. He could withdraw immediately, and the incident would be logged as a navigation error, exactly as he claimed. Or he could continue forward, and she would interpret that as an invasion and respond accordingly. The choice was his, but he had 60 seconds to make it. The Krell commander was War Master Thun Ket, the same officer who had led the enforcement fleet at Proxima and barely survived. He remembered what human weapons could do. He remembered watching his fleet torn apart. After 50 seconds of silence, his ships turned and jumped away. No shots were fired. No lives were lost. But the message was clear. 2. Human space was defended by people willing and able to protect it. President Cooper used the incident as leverage in negotiations. He pointed out to moderate council members that hardliners were actively trying to restart the war. Every provocation risked escalation. The choice was between accepting reforms that preserved most of the council's structure or fighting another war that might destroy the council entirely. The turning point came from an unexpected source. A minor species, called the Reth, who had never spoken in council sessions before, requested the floor. Their representative was an elderly female named Mira who had served as a junior functionary for decades. She spoke quietly, but everyone listened because her words carried the weight of accumulated observation. Mira recounted the history of the council from her perspective. She described how decisions were made without consulting smaller species, how enforcement was applied selectively based on political convenience, how promising young civilizations were kept subordinate to preserve the power of established members. She spoke of watching humanity fight for the rights that every species deserved, but few had the courage to demand. Then she made a formal proposal. The council should be dissolved and reformed as a true democratic alliance. Every species would have one vote, regardless of size or power. Decisions would require majority support. Military action would require overwhelming consensus. The founding species would retain honored positions, but not special authority. Velthos tried to dismiss the proposal as naive and unworkable. But Sothral seconded it. Then the Yeath representative. Then the Draknor. Then dozens more. Species that had never opposed the council suddenly found their voice. The vote was called. 2/3 of the council voted in favor of reform. The old Galactic Council ceased to exist. In its place rose the Galactic Alliance. The transition wasn't smooth. The Vextar withdrew entirely, retreating to their home systems and refusing to participate. Some Krell factions did the same, but most species, including the majority of Luminari, joined the new organization. Humanity was offered full membership with equal status. Helen Grant stood before the first session of the Galactic Alliance and accepted on behalf of Earth and all human colonies. No conditions, no restrictions, just membership based on the same terms as every other species. Admiral Kyle Bennett received orders to stand down from full military alert. The war was over. Not through surrender or ceasefire, but through fundamental change in how the galaxy organized itself. Human shipyards shifted from military production to civilian construction. The battle fleets that had defended humanity would now help patrol Alliance space, protecting all members equally. Nina Reeves walked through the memorial on Earth, dedicated to those who died in the war. Tens of thousands of names carved in stone. Good people who had sacrificed everything so humanity could stand free. She thought about the future those people had bought with their lives. A future where humans and aliens worked together as equals. Where her children could explore the stars without fear or restriction. President Cooper addressed the people of Earth one final time before stepping down from office. The war had aged him visibly. The stress of leading humanity through its greatest crisis taking a physical toll. But his voice was strong when he spoke. He reminded everyone that freedom was never free. That the rights they now enjoyed had been purchased with blood and sacrifice. That the responsibility of freedom was to use it wisely and protect it fiercely. The galaxy that had watched in terror as humanity abandoned the negotiating table and raised their battle fleet now watched with something different. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition. The understanding that humanity had forced change not just for themselves but for every species tired of living under the Council's absolute authority. Smaller civilizations that had been trapped in subordinate positions for centuries now had a voice. The alliance wasn't perfect. There were still disputes and tensions. Some species refused to join and remained independent. Others joined reluctantly, uncertain about the new order. But for the first time in galactic history, there was a genuine attempt to govern through consent rather than force. Helen Grant retired from diplomatic service and took a position teaching at Earth's new Xenopolitical Institute. She trained the next generation of diplomats, teaching them the lessons she had learned. That patience had limits, that some things were worth fighting for. That respect came from strength, not from begging. Admiral Bennett commanded the Alliance Joint Defense Force, working alongside officers from a dozen different species. The cooperation was imperfect and sometimes frustrating, but it was real. Humanity's tactical innovations were shared with allies. Alien technologies were adapted for human use. The military that had nearly destroyed itself in battle now became a force for stability. 10 years after humanity's rejection by the Council, the galaxy looked very different. Human colonies spread across dozens of systems. Trade networks connected Earth with hundreds of worlds. Human scientists collaborated with alien researchers on projects that benefited all species. The children born after the war knew aliens as neighbors and colleagues, not as enemies or overlords. Some historians argued that humanity's rise had been inevitable, that any species with Earth's determination and adaptability would have succeeded eventually. Others claimed it was luck and circumstance, that a few key battles going differently could have led to human extinction rather than triumph. But those who had lived through it knew the truth. Humanity had risen because when faced with impossible odds, they chose to fight rather than submit. They had built weapons in secret while pretending to negotiate. They had accepted terrible casualties rather than surrender freedom. They had forced the galaxy to acknowledge them through demonstrated capability rather than inherited privilege. The old Vextar Council, bitter in their isolated systems, would sometimes broadcast messages condemning the Alliance and predicting its collapse. Velthos, ancient and unchanging, insisted that order required hierarchy and that equality led to chaos. Few listened. The species that had joined the Alliance were too busy building something new. And on quiet nights, when Nina Reeves stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the stars, she thought about how close humanity had come to annihilation. One lost battle. One failed diplomatic effort. One moment of weakness. Any of it could have ended differently, but it hadn't. Humanity had stood firm when the galaxy demanded submission. They had fought when fighting seemed hopeless. They had won when winning was impossible. The galaxy had watched in terror as humanity abandoned the table and raised their battle fleet. Now it watched in wonder as humanity helped build a better future for all.